That's the power of Christ to heal and restore, and not only restore, but go beyond that. Don't let your tomorrow be the same as today. Risk the change. Reach out to God, cry out to God. He'll hear that cry, and he'll meet you at the point of your need.
Hey guys, it's Melissa Moore. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of Faith, Hope, Love, where we grow together in our faith, increase in hope, and learn how to better love God and love other people. On today's episode, we are joined by our special guest, Dr. Lucy Williams, and she's a clinical psychologist with many different areas of expertise. But for today's episode, we're going to be talking about codependency, addiction, as well as dysfunctional family relationships. So Lucy, thanks for joining us on the show today. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you.
As Melissa said, I'm Dr. Lucy Williams, and I'm retired clinical psychologist. So my clinical training was an internship at a state hospital in Madison, Indiana. And I chose 3 different rotations. One was the addiction unit, one was the adolescent inpatient unit, and the other was chronic mental illness. And all of these wards were locked. And the addiction unit was very interesting. That was my first exposure to working with alcoholics, and those in this unit were alcoholics. And back then, they could stay 3 months inpatient. That's unheard of today. And the reason it's unheard of today is what I observed back then is they didn't do their work until maybe 2 weeks before they were going to be released, and then the panic set in. Prior to that, my husband and I were in marital therapy, and my therapist said at one point, "Oh, I get it. You're an adult child of an alcoholic." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, you know, your dad drank." And I said, "He's not an alcoholic. He hasn't had a drink in whatever years it was." And he said, "Yes, he is an alcoholic. What he is considered a dry drunk. A dry drunk is a person who has stopped drinking, but all the other behavior is alive and intact. Unless you change your thinking, the disease continues."
You know, we've kind of talked about this a little bit before we're filming the episode, but you know, addiction's really kind of permeated our society, and it's something that has impacted so many families. And so, you know, for women that are watching this, maybe they're battling with their own addiction, or maybe they love someone that's battling an addiction. So if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing, you know, how does addiction work, and why do people fall into addiction?
Why do people get addicted? Nature or nurture? Well, it's both. Twin studies have shown that alcoholism runs within family systems. And does everyone get it? No. They just got the gene, I guess. Is it modeled? Absolutely. When I think of the scripture where Jesus says the sins of the fathers will be visited unto the 4th generation, I believe that's what they're talking about. It's modeled. Usually the onset is in the 20s and can be full blown by the 30s. And it's brought on by high stress situations where the expectation for exemplary performance is put upon their shoulders. Maybe somebody else didn't put it there, they put it there themselves. But it's brought on that way. And so the person who develops an addiction uses the substance to change their mood. That's a real danger signal. That when we can't tolerate the sadness we have without having a drink or using any other kind of substance, that's a warning. If we're trying to change our mood, not good. Claudia Black makes a distinction between process addictions. That's something we do versus ingesting addictions, something we take in to change the internal mood. And internet addiction, spending, eating, gaming, The addiction is progressive by nature. That means it always gets worse. And so somebody might argue with you that they don't have an addiction because, well, an alcoholic has said this to me before. I'm not an alcoholic because I've never missed a day of work. Well, that might be true, but it's illogical. Being able to go to work every day doesn't mean you're not alcoholic. It just means you're able to do that. But what other things are you not able to do as a result of the drinking? So it's always progressive by nature. It gets worse, not better. Some are addicted very early, very quick. We call those early onset. Some, it takes a while to develop. They might stay at a certain stage, which we call functional. In other words, they can go to work every day. But then one day it kicks in and it's so out of control, it's not funny. If you don't mind, I'd like to go into just a little bit of history where this all began. In 1933, Bill W., I don't know if you've ever heard that name. Bill W. is the founder of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, co-founder, I should say. He was a hopeless drunk, very gifted man, hospitalized inpatient 4 times in 1 year. And his treating physician made the comment to him that he thought, prior to that, everyone said it was a moral failure. This was the first physician that said this is a disease, and it's a disease of allergy. The alcohol affects the person very differently from those without the allergy. And the allergy manifested in a compulsive desire to drink. And once they started drinking, they couldn't stop. There's an expression, 1 drink is too few and 10 is not enough. Bill W. was visited by a friend who was a drinking buddy while he was hospitalized. And this drinking buddy had achieved some sobriety for a few months. And Bill W. was shocked. How could that be? And his friend urged him to turn his life over to the care of Christ. Bill W. thought about that, had a horrible night that night, tossed and turned, finally cried out to God, I'll do anything, anything. If you're real, take this from me and show up. So I have challenged many a person as an evangelistic tool that if you don't believe in God, that's okay. If he's real, I challenge you to say this prayer. If you're real, God, show up, and show up in a way I get it. I know it's you. And if you pray that with earnest, just wait and see what happens. I have yet to see that fail with anyone that earnestly prayed that prayer. So back to Bill W. So Bill W. got involved in a recovery program and worked on himself. And in the process of that, he realized that he was not going to be able to maintain his sobriety unless he started helping others as well. He couldn't just focus on himself. So he met up with another co-founder that was in the same program, and they developed AA and relied on the higher power or Christ to take that from them. There are many people along the way that have contributed greatly to this field. First of all, James Dobson. Everybody knows him, Christian psychologist. Back when I was first studying psychology in the church, it was of Satan in some churches. Psychology was not to be trusted. If you wanted to go into that field, better look out. So James Dobson brought psychology into the church where it was acceptable to study psychology. Other people have come along. Melody Beattie, she did a lot of work with codependence. She was working on alcoholic unit and realized that the families associated with the alcoholic were, if not more, every bit as sick as the alcoholic was in different ways. And so she did a lot of work with that. She's got 2 great books out, Codependent No More, which is classic, and A Codependent's Guide to the 12 Steps. Then there's Claudia Black, who was also social worker working on an addictions unit. And she focused in on the different roles that people played within the family. And she explains it very well. When we grow up in addictive family systems, how can we possibly come out healthy? We've had to use different coping mechanisms to make sense of that. And it doesn't make sense much of the time. And so depending on the birth order of the child and how long the addictive process has been in place, it will affect them differently, and they will respond differently, different ways of coping. And so she, this is not an all-inclusive list, but she came up with the responsible one. It's usually the oldest one, who was pressed into service very, very early, cooking, cleaning, taking on the responsibilities of the adult when the adult was not there to do that. And all these roles that we have played within the family system are valuable. They helped us survive. The problem is we relied only on those and didn't learn the balance of those. So the responsible one is so used to telling everyone else what to do and running the show, they don't listen. They have to really focus on learning to listen to others' needs and wants. Then there's the lost child. They blend into the woodwork. They follow whatever it takes to keep the peace in the family, but they don't know how to initiate or lead as adults. They continue to be a follower. Placator, they take the pain away. They'll do whatever it takes. They wind up as adults as not knowing what their own needs are. And interestingly enough, the placators are the ones who go into the helping fields. An abundance in the helping fields because they're good at it. They learn how to do that as kids. They learn how to read people. The scapegoat. There's the child that distracts from what's really going on in the family and takes the family blame and shame upon themselves so other people won't know what's going on in the family. The mascot, the clown, who also distracts, makes light of everything. So as an adult, they have real trouble taking things seriously. And other people are very frustrated around them. The serious one is so busy leading that they don't know how to play or be spontaneous as adults. They think all that is nonsense. It's just work, 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 work. Then the angry one. Anger is easier to feel than the hurt and the pain. So they stay angry to avoid feeling. So she was the one who really focused in on the family work, involving the entire family in the growth process and the recovery process. She realized that it was implicitly taught to family members, don't talk, don't feel, and therefore don't trust. Children were taught from a very early age, don't you tell anybody what's going on with this family. Children tried to cover for the parent. Don't feel. Well, I feel this or that. No, you don't. Shut up now, or I'll give you something to cry about. Those kinds of things. And when we come out of family systems that also have mental illness in the mix, that's a double whammy for the children. Not only is there substance abuse going on, but the mental illness. And it's crazy making behavior because the children don't know how to figure that out, and they internalize it as they are the problem. Children are egocentric, meaning it's all about the children, and that's normal as a child is growing up. But they take on the problems of the parents and think they were the cause. And they carry that deep shame into their adult life. And Claudia Black came up with the adult children of alcoholics whole system. That's how recovery really started. Other than AA, it was adult children of alcoholics. And that's still going. She's got a treatment center in Arizona, I believe, where she really focuses on the young. And she's written 2 books that are very informative. First one was My Dad Has a Disease. My Dad Loves Me. And the second one is It Will Never Happen to Me. That was the book that was prescribed to me by my therapist when I said, my dad is not an alcoholic. And so I saw my family system between the pages of those books.
I appreciate you taking time just to kind of break down the family system too, because, I've shared in some of my previous episodes, that's part of my family background, kind of growing up in a house with someone that dealt with, depression and bipolar and alcohol addiction. And so, as a kid, you kind of, like you said, like you kind of learn different ways to cope, and myself and my brothers all dealt with it differently. But I think, there's obviously a genetic component with addiction being passed on, but also if you see addiction happening in your childhood and you kind of see, my parents have shown me this is the only way to deal with stress or anxiety or depression. These are the ways to cope. Then it's so easy as an adult to keep doing those things. Or even if you're like, well, I'm not going to be an alcoholic like my mom, but I'm going to do something else instead. And other things can become addictions too. And I think, again, for those that are more, and again, the codependent role, or, again, they're going to avoid addiction, but they'll find their own ways to cope unless something changes. So with that, I know we've kind of talked about with, addictions oftentimes look like a substance like alcohol or drugs. Are there other addictions? I mean, codependency even can be an addiction, right?
It is. It's an addiction to another person. Instead of the substance, alcohol or drugs or whatever, it's trying to control that other person, trying to placate them. And in the process, the codependent loses themselves in the whole thing. It's all about the addict. They do everything for the addict. In fact, they enable and don't realize they're enabling. It's hard in the church for codependence because it looks like love. It looks like turning the other cheek. Tough love looks mean, but it enables the person to continue in their process. And not only that, it enables the pain to stay there.
And I appreciate you bringing that up. It's almost encouraged in the church to kind of act with these kind of codependent mentalities. And again, if you've grown up in that role, it's really easy to carry that into adulthood. And it is encouraged. But for us as individuals that are dealing with codependency, being able to set those boundaries and saying, this is what a healthy relationship looks like, whether it's with a family member or someone that you're serving, or, even, just with friends and stuff as well. I've found that with working with individuals that are hurting, boundaries actually are healthy for them because it helps them to not lean on me, but lean on Jesus. And I think when we're pointing people always to ourselves in this codependent way, people are never going to find healing in that because we don't have nearly enough. So with that, there's a lot of different methods to encourage people that are dealing with addiction or codependency. I know it's 12-step programs. What are some ways that you would encourage someone that's looking for healing?
So Celebrate Recovery was authored by John Baker and with Rick Warren's help at Saddleback Church in Southern California. And that's where the whole recovery movement began. And that has really done a tremendous service for people struggling with addictions within the church. The church I attended, they had T-shirts that said, I'm one of those people. And people would say, well, what's that? And so they tell them about whatever. For a program like that to be successful, they have to have the backing of the pastor 100%. If it's just a token, it's not gonna flourish, because he has to talk about it from the pulpit. Jesus says he's coming back for a church without spot or wrinkle. I can see how that can be as people get real about where they are, where they've been, what has happened to them, their response to that, and the fact that they don't want to stay there. They want to grow beyond that. So Celebrate Recovery is a 12-step program that really allows them to do that, and it addresses the entire family. They have programs even for the children. So the way it works is 1 week every meeting begins with praise and worship. And there's no bones about it who the healer is. It's Jesus Christ. And then there'll be a teaching 1 week on the 12 steps and the principles. Then people go to their small groups. What I like is women go with women and men go with men. There's no mixed groups. AA, they've got everybody all mixed up, and that can lead to real problems because you're sharing very intimate things, and someone could take advantage of another if too much information that they don't need to know. So they do that. There'll be a topic of discussion. They'll either talk about the teaching that week. The next week is a testimony. Someone who has achieved a certain amount of recovery will give their testimony. And time again, it's just amazing what God has done in their lives. You look at that individual and you think, now, they couldn't have been there. They couldn't have done that. But they're not lying to you. That's the power of Christ to heal and restore, and not only restore, but go beyond that. And so that gives hope to anybody out there. You don't have to have the same problem they did, but it's the same solution. Jesus heals.
I love that. And I think, again, if someone is watching this and they're feeling discouraged, whether maybe they're dealing with their own addiction, or maybe you're walking through this with a family member or a friend, there is hope. I mean, there's like a lot of great programs out there. I mean, obviously Celebrate Recovery is awesome. Regeneration is another one that's good, that I feel like both programs kind of cover the vast different kinds of addiction that are out there in the world. I mean, obviously alcohol and drugs are kind of the easiest to measure because it takes a very physical toll, but even gambling or pornography, codependency, pride even can be an issue that you can see that coming in. Control. So I mean, there's so many things that I feel like as humans, like we're flawed. We were created to be in the image of God, but through sin, we've experienced this brokenness that is generational, whether it's biologically generational or nature versus nurture. Your environment is toxic, and it can lead into more either codependent or addictive adult lifestyles for those that are adults of addicts. So, again, if you're watching this and you're saying, hey, this sounds like me, this sounds like my experience, I would encourage you, take time, find a therapist in your area, find a recovery group that, whether you're, addiction or codependency is your thing, take time and try it out. Go for one meeting, see what you think. I would encourage you, stick through a couple meetings, try and, it's going to be a complicated and difficult process, but it's worth it. And especially if you're walking through this as an addict, it's important for you to seek God in the middle of this healing process. He's ultimately the one that's going to do the changing work in you. And obviously, as Lucy has shared with us here today, there's so many different puzzle pieces. It's a complicated, sometimes difficult process to find healing from addiction. So the best time to start is right now. So again, take time, find a group in your area and get connected there. So before we close, I know we've talked about kind of the, obviously the family relationships, the family dynamics and addiction, as well as, some different opportunities for them to find healing. But I guess if, do you feel like we can really incorporate faith and God into the healing process outside of those 12-step groups? What does that look like to really incorporate God?
Well, outside of those groups, I think it would be difficult. Addiction processes are disordered thinking at its very base. As I said earlier, unless you change the thinking, the behavior doesn't change. Reading a book is not going to change anyone. It's going to pique your curiosity. It's going to shine a light on, oh my gosh, I do this, and oh my gosh, I do that. But it's not going to change. We become damaged through relationships, and we will heal through healthy relationships. We keep talking about 12 steps, and there are people out there that don't have a clue what a 12-step is. First step is probably the hardest. We admitted we were powerless over addiction and compulsive behavior, and our lives have become unmanageable. We have to know where we're at if we're ever going to heal. We have to be honest where we're at if we're going to heal. Step 2 came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the addictive process is an insane process. It doesn't make sense. It's crazy making behavior for the addict as well as all those around that addict. Step 3 made a decision to turn our life and our will over to the care of God. Now that can be very difficult. If people have had an abusive parent, now how am I going to do that? My parent wasn't very kind to me. My parent was abusive. So how can I trust a God that I can't see when I couldn't trust the people I could? Step 4, making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now that one is a toughie. You look back on your life to all the hurts and hangups you have, and you record those down. Who did what to whom? What was your part of the whole thing? Was there a part that you had involvement with? Many times, the person who is suffering from intense low self-esteem for having been abused as a parent for the first time realized that wasn't their fault. That was the substance or the mental illness of the parent or whatever else. They were just a child. Step 5, this is a toughie too. That's when the sponsor comes in. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of the wrongs. So they'll read their 4th step to their sponsor. Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Remember the man at the well that couldn't get in the waters when they were stirred up to be healed? Jesus asked him if he wanted to be healed. Now that seems like a strange thing. Well, there are some benefits to being irresponsible. Somebody else picks up the slack. Is the person willing, entirely willing, to no longer get the benefit, if you will, of their disease? Are they willing to move forward? Step 7, humbly asked him to remove all of our shortcomings. Only God can remove them. We can't. Just like we can't clean ourselves up from sin, only the grace of God does that, the blood of Jesus. Step 8, made a list of all the persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them as best we can. That's a toughie too. Got to go back and ask for forgiveness. Got to go back and tell the person, I did this and this and this, and it probably had you feeling this and this and this, and I'm sorry. Knowing that person might turn on you, it's entirely possible. So you go with the expectation. There is no expectation. You go to make your amends. You cannot do anything about the other person's amends. They can accept it or reject it, but at least you've done what God asked you to do. Step 9, made direct amends to those people whenever possible, except when to do so would cause them further harm. There are situations that would cause more harm. Step 10, continued to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So that's a daily inventory we're encouraged to do. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the ability to carry that out. Step 12, having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all our affairs. So Bill W. had it all figured out. He couldn't clean himself up. It required a spiritual awakening, and it required God to do it, and it required him helping others get their sobriety. And I don't know how we can do that in isolation without a group of people around us that are working on the same thing.
I think the thing that's great about a 12-step program is you have the accountability of the people that you're walking alongside. And especially if it is a Christian program, you know, if you're being pointed to Jesus, and we talk about this whole series is this idea of if we keep our eyes on Jesus, we're able to let go of the things, the burdens and the sins of this life and be able to run our race well. That's in Hebrews 12. But, you know, if we're, you know, trying to run the race on our own, or we're not looking at Jesus, you know, we're gonna run out of steam. We're going to get exhausted. We're going to be clinging on to the people around us rather than running after Him and seeking Him for our encouragement. So I truly believe, you know, obviously a 12-step program is so valuable because it gives you the guidance for how to go about healing. It gives you a community to do it with. But I think if it can be a process that's focused on Jesus Christ, the God of the Bible, He's the one that's going to do the changing work in us. So I appreciate so much your time and just, you know, sharing about, you know, how addiction works, how codependency and, you know, dysfunctional family systems works. Just, you know, I'm hoping that someone watching this is really encouraged. If this resonates with you, take some time, talk to God about it, pray about what this would look like for you to find healing. So again, you know, as we close, do you have like a final word that you would maybe give to someone that's kind of starting this process, whether they're an addict or maybe a family member or friend of an addict?
Don't let your tomorrow be the same as today. Risk the change. Reach out to God, cry out to God. He'll hear that cry and He'll meet you at the point of your need.
For those that are listening, I'm praying for you if this is something that you're walking through, that you would really take that first step, talk with God about it, ask Him to meet you right where you are. And I agree with Lucy, He will do it. So I've seen that in my own life. I've seen that in the lives of many people that I love that have battled with addiction. And I have hope for you. Even if you don't have that hope for yourself right now, I believe that God will show up if you ask Him to. So anyway, thank you guys again for joining me for another episode of Faith, Hope, Love. I will see you right back here next week.